The sterile lights of the neurocore facility hummed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the rows of cryopods lining the walls. Dr. Eleanor Quasar stood before Pod 47, where a young woman's face was frozen in perpetual slumber. The cryostasis process had only recently been perfected, and scientists were still learning to fine-tune its parameters. "Still no change in her brain activity?" Eleanor asked, his eyes fixed on the monitoring screens. Lieutenant Commander Arkea Vex shook her head, her dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. "Negative, Doctor. I've checked the scans 3 times. Her neural network is completely isolated." This was supposed to be a breakthrough experiment, using cryostasis to revive a subject with advanced cybernetic enhancements, one who could potentially help bridge humanity's technological gap. But now, as they stood here on this rainy evening in 2178, failure seemed an unwelcome companion. A quiet beep caught their attention. One of the monitors flickered to life. "Signal from Pod 16, its automated voice interrupted. 16, Arkea repeated, furrowing her brow. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Unlikely. We've run extensive diagnostics on all pods. Maybe it's a glitch." Arkea tapped into the central system, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. "What is this?" she muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. An unsettling pause filled the room before Eleanor spoke again. "That doesn't seem like any sort of natural occurrence." Eleanor's eyes locked onto the main console as Arkea wrestled with the central system. His slender fingers drummed a staccato beat on the edge of his workstation, betraying his growing impatience. "What do you think it means?" he asked, turning to face her. "Pod 16 was our control, the prototype for these cybernetic enhancements." Arkea's gaze flicked up from her console. "Maybe someone, or something triggered a local anomaly." Her tone held the weight of hesitation. Inch by inch, Eleanor felt his skepticism unravel. "That would be unprecedented," he whispered, brow furrowed in thought. "We've run simulations, tested every parameter. There's no known way to bypass these systems." As if responding to his statement, another console across the room crackled to life. "Frequency shift detected at Pod 42. "A second anomaly?" Eleanor muttered, a sense of unease clawing its way up his spine. Arkea sprang into action. Her hands flew across the central controls, accessing restricted sections of the facility's infrastructure. A pale map of neurocore materialized on her screen, with icons for individual cryopods flickering to life. 2 pods now, and both have cybernetic overrides enabled, she read aloud, a line of tiny furrows creasing her dark complexion. Eleanor felt his unease intensify. "Try accessing their internal logs. If that's a glitch, I'd like to know where it came from." As Arkea worked, Eleanor drifted away from the console, lost in thought. These events defied all reason. If this was indeed an attack, it implied an unknown entity capable of infiltration had gained access to their research. But then, there were also these signals, anomalies on a frequency most of humanity would be blissfully unaware of, Parallax IV. "Arkea, I've isolated the issue," Eleanor said, his eyes scanning the data streaming across her console. "These anomalies are being generated on Pod 42's internal frequency." Arkea's fingers stilled on the controls as she looked up from her work. "Internal frequency?" she repeated. "That shouldn't be possible. Pod 42 is still in cryostasis, just like Pod 16. Eleanor nodded grimly. "I know. That's what makes this so disturbing. It implies something is trying to interface with the pods directly." Arkea's expression turned sharp. "Can you access the protocols for internal frequency encryption?" "It shouldn't be encrypted," Eleanor muttered, his fingers flying across his own console as he accessed the relevant codes. "If it was, we would have known about this a long time ago. Ah, wait, there's a layer of firewalls here. Someone set up an isolation protocol on these specific pods." Arkea snorted skeptically. "Who do you think programmed that?" Eleanor shook his head, his eyes intent on the data flowing across her console. "I have no idea, but whoever it was, they're using advanced code-breaking techniques. I've managed to bypass one layer of encryption, but so far, nothing is revealing itself." Suddenly, a soft chime echoed through the room as Eleanor's eyes widened. "Arkea, we have something. A message on the Parallax IV frequency. Encrypted, but I'm getting a read on it. Someone is trying to send us coordinates to the pod control rooms." The lights in the room seemed to darken ever so slightly as Archaea leaned forward. "We're under attack," she said quietly. The fluorescent lights overhead cast an unforgiving glare on the control room's sterile surface as Archaea and Eleanor pored over the coordinates flashing on their consoles. The soft hum of machinery provided a jarring contrast to the tension building between them. "What are these?" Eleanor muttered, eyes darting back and forth across his screen. Archaea's gaze snapped up from her console. "Those have to be some sort of lockout sequence." A look of skepticism etched itself across Eleanor's features. "You think so? This seems primitive for anyone familiar with our system designs." "We can't rule out the possibility that whoever programmed those pods actually understands our architecture," Archaea countered, her voice measured despite a hint of defensiveness creeping in. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Possible? We've gone over every possible contingency. Internal firewalls, protocol triggers. Nothing should be able to breach these layers. Yet something has." Her tone was laced with a quiet acceptance of uncertainty. A soft beep from Archaea's console interrupted the impasse as she worked to interface with the pods. Eleanor turned back to his console, hands moving swiftly across the keyboard in search of connections to Pod 42's life support and maintenance systems. "Wait," he called out, frowning at a specific panel on his screen. "Look at this." The faint glow from Archaea's panel illuminated her features as she leaned forward, peering intently at the data streaming across Eleanor's console. A pale note of worry crept into her voice. "What am I missing here?" Eleanor muttered to himself, his eyes scanning the codes racing past him like errant fingers on a pianist's keyboard. Archaea took a deep breath before answering. "I'm reading fluctuations in Pod 42's stabilizers. And I'd bet my paycheck those internal firewalls are actually serving as more than just security measures." Eleanor shot her an exasperated glance. "You think there's some hidden purpose? Something designed from the inside to assist this attack? Designs like these don't usually appear out of nowhere." Archaea's hands danced across her console, her eyes scanning the code as Eleanor struggled to decipher the encrypted message. "I think I'm getting close," he muttered, frustration etched on his face. "Close is not good enough right now," Archaea shot back, her voice laced with a hint of desperation. "We don't have much time before." A burst of static interrupted the feed, sending both their consoles into a chaotic display of error messages and beeps. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to hum in sync with their agitation. "What just happened?" Eleanor growled, slamming his fist on the console. Archaea's eyes widened as she worked to re-establish contact with the pod control rooms. "The encryption is fighting us," she exclaimed, frustration making her voice rise. "We're getting a message, but it's not sticking." Eleanor rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the creeping sense of unease spreading through the room. They were getting close. He could feel it. But with each failed attempt, their chances of unlocking the secrets of the pods dwindled. "I think I see," Archaea said suddenly, her eyes locked on Eleanor's face. "We're not trying to access the pod frequency from the right angle." Eleanor's gaze snapped back to his console as understanding dawned. "Try a lateral approach," he urged, excitement creeping into his voice. Archaea's fingers flew across her controls, and a new sequence of code spilled onto their screens. This time, instead of error messages, they saw a pulsing blue line stretching between the pod control rooms. "Keep going," Eleanor whispered, his eyes fixed on the swirling light field. "We have it," Archaea said quietly, her face pale. "We've got coordinates to 3 pod locations." Eli's head snapped back up, a mixture of triumph and wariness etched across his features. 3? Archaea nodded slowly. "Yes, it looks like whatever is happening in those pods, it's not confined to just one. But what does that even—" A sharp click echoed through the room as Eleanor's console beeped softly, silencing their exchange. "Coordinates received," it announced, a low-pitched digitized voice. "Pod Alpha 1 has 34.7219 latitude and 188.4567 longitude. Pod Beta 6 reads at 45.2345 degrees north and 122.7890 degrees west." The air seemed to fill with anticipation as Archaea's eyes met Eleanor's, the weight of their next move settling heavy between them. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ellie's expression had become set, the calculated risk reflected in every fiber of his being. We go. Arkea's fingers flew across her console as she verified the coordinates streaming in from the pod control rooms. Eleanor stood tall beside her, his eyes fixed intently on the data as it synchronized with their maps. Pod Alpha 1 is on planet GA7842b, he murmured, fingers working swiftly to pinpoint the location on their charts. Arkea nodded curtly, her expression unreadable. Beta 6 is approximately 30 kilometers north of Pod Alpha 1, within the abandoned research facility. Eleanor's gaze snapped to hers. What about Delta 5? The console beeped softly as Arkea entered new coordinates, a faint tremble visible on her lips. It's somewhere on Mars Colony's Delta Quadrant. The last known marker is near one of the abandoned storage chambers. A flicker of understanding ran through Eleanor like fire. Each pod was tied to different locations across the galaxy, seemingly unconnected at first glance. However, their encrypted message hinted that there might be a pattern to these dispersals. Arkea? Eli asked quietly, hand on the backrest of her chair. We can't do this alone. She raised her eyes, an almost hesitant smile twisting across her mouth as she turned to meet his gaze. I have an idea, she began softly. We know the coordinates are linked somehow. A harsh beep erupted from Eli's console, interrupting Arkea mid-sentence. He leapt forward, pounding the emergency shutdown on the system. The room around them fell silent as Eli exchanged a tense glance with Arkea. What was that? He asked under his breath. The response came without warning, an artificial voice piercing through the dead air. Critical breach detected, system reset sequence initiated, all pods stand by for lockdown. Arkea's eyes snapped towards Eleanor as he frantically worked to override the system reset. Her console beeped in protest, refusing to yield to her commands. What just happened? Eleanor muttered, his face darkening with concern. It's trying to isolate all pods, including Pad Alpha 1, Arkea replied, her voice tight as she attempted to manually bypass the security protocol. Eleanor's hands flew across his console, and a burst of static shot from the speakers, silencing the ominous message. For a moment, the control room sank into uneasy silence. Then, without warning, Eleanor's eyes locked onto Arkea's, sparking with determination. We can't give up now. We have to get these coordinates to someone, anyone who can help us break through this impasse. Who? Arkea countered, a hint of desperation creeping into her tone. Infiltrating the pod control systems isn't exactly something Dr. Reyes or the engineers are equipped for. Eleanor's face hardened, shoulders set with resolve. We'll go to them, then. They know this system inside and out. They can help us pinpoint why these pods have been scattered across the galaxy like breadcrumbs. A blaring alarm tore through the quiet of the control room, shattering their conversation. Security override incoming, Ellie's console informed him grimly. Arkea's hands shot up to shield her eyes from the searing lights now flashing rapidly overhead. Eleanor, it's too late. It is not too late, he bellowed back over the cacophony of warnings and alarms erupting around them. The words seemed lost in chaos, but were somehow amplified in Arkea's mind. She strained forward along with Eleanor as he leapt into the maelstrom, typing feverishly at his console. Their fingers danced across the interfaces, working towards a common goal: breach the pod system's isolation protocol before losing control entirely. As alarms blazed on around them, they hunched closer to their workstations, every keystroke and movement calculated towards finding a glimmer of hope beyond the dead air. Arkea locked hands with Eleanor as her fingers met his, creating an electric spark of intent, refusing to be silenced by failure or despair. The security team poured into the control room, their faces grim beneath the fluorescent lights. Eleanor, Arkea, we need you to step away from the consoles immediately, one of them ordered, hand resting on his holstered sidearm. Not now, Eleanor cut in, fingers flying across the interface as he struggled to override the security system's lockdown sequence. We're running out of time. These pods are about to lose all contact with us. If you don't comply, we'll have to subdue you, a second officer warned, eyes darting between Arkea and Eleanor. Arkea shook off their hand, her grip on the console armrest tightening. We're not going anywhere. Not now that we've finally broken through to the pods. As if responding to her words, Eleanor's screen flickered with renewed life, beeping steadily as the system rebooted once more. This time, however, a different tone echoed from his comms device. A low-end encryption sequence detected. His console spat out. Running diagnostic. Possible breakthrough imminent. With each heartbeat, tension stretched between them like a spring ready to snap. They'd gotten this far on hope alone. There was now a scent of triumph within their grasp. The officer's growls subsided into confused glances at the screens. "Please, try again," one of them ventured with a hint of pleading. "Maybe. We already have it," Eleanor called back over his shoulder as Archaea's face lit up in stark confirmation beneath the console lights. Eleanor yanked his shoulder toward her, their heads bent closely together for the first time since that disarming gaze shared mere minutes before. "You see these?" he murmured at top volume to shatter through rising cacophony. "Pad Alpha 1's now linked. No more echoes of an abyss." A jolt passed like electricity down Archaea's frame, and in a heartbeat, the screens flickered with triumphant new life as their comms beamed live transmission signals back into focus, bringing renewed hope on waves of crackling connection. This resonated deep within Archaea, spurring fierce determination to ride this newly reignited thread out through further stormy challenges that loomed ahead. "Eleanor," she whispered. "We'll get the rest." Eleanor hollered back, without looking up from where his fingers clung on desperately around each other's locked hands. Fingers entwined at a pressure strong enough to drive words back toward sanity. Archaea's eyes locked onto Eleanor's, their fingers still intertwined on the console armrests as the beacons of hope began to reignite. The security team had retreated, bewildered by their sudden resurgence, and the control room was once again a sanctuary for the unlikely duo. As LA worked feverishly to unlock the last of Pad Alpha 1's secrets, Archaea felt an unshakable sense that they stood teetering on the cusp of something momentous. With each passing second, the distance between their scattered pods began to shrink, like stars coalescing into a constellation. "What does it mean?" Eleanor asked, his brow furrowed in concentration as he pored over the renewed data streaming from Pad Alpha 1. Archaea's gaze followed his, tracing the intricate network of codes that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "The encryption sequence is unlike anything I've seen before," she murmured, her mind racing to comprehend its implications. "It's as if—" "Like a gateway to Pandora's box," Eleanor supplied, a hint of awe creeping into his voice. As their eyes met once more, a new challenge crystallized in the air between them. Archaea leaned forward, her chest heaving with an almost reckless optimism. What lies beyond? But before Eli could respond, a piercing cry pierced the control room's composure, jolting both of them back into reality. One of the security officers stumbled toward them, their face contorted in alarm. "Eleanor, Archaea, you have to come with me now," he urged, his hand grasping for their wrists as if they might be yanked away at any moment. "Dr. Reyes' team has cracked the encryption code on Pad Beta 6. An electrified hush descended upon the room as anticipation and terror wrestled in Eleanor's face. Would they finally unlock the secrets hidden across the expanse of lost pods, or stumble into something far more sinister? "Eleanor, Archaea, you have to come with me now," the security officer urged, tugging at their wrists. "Dr. Reyes' team has cracked the encryption code on Pad Beta 6. Eleanor's eyes snapped towards the officer as he hesitated for a fraction of a second before pulling his hands free. Archaea leaned back in her chair, her expression wary. "What does it mean?" she asked, trying to gauge the officer's tone. The security officer's face twisted with concern. "They think they've found a pattern in the encryption, a key to unlock something." Eleanor stood up, his eyes burning with intensity as he stared at Archaea. "We need to hear this. If Dr. Reyes' team has made progress." Archaea's gaze softened, understanding flashing across her face. She rose from her chair, falling into step beside Eleanor as they followed the officer towards the security room. "You should know you're both being hailed for your efforts," the security officer mentioned hastily over his shoulder. The control room slid past them like a fading memory as they reached the security room. The room was alive with hushed conversations and flickering holographic displays, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Archaea's eyes narrowed as she scanned the faces around her. Dr. Reyes stood near the edge of the room, his usually composed demeanor ruffled by concern. Ah, thank you for arriving promptly. He interrupted before Eleanor could ask any questions. A tense pause spread through the room, as if the assembled people were waiting for something to unravel within themselves, along with their tangled threads. What was it that Dr. Ray's team had discovered, and what lay beyond? As Archaea and Eleanor were led into the security room, the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken questions. Dr. Ray's team stood huddled around a central console, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of holographic displays. The air was electric, charged with anticipation. "What have you found?" Eleanor pressed. His hands flexed in anticipation as he leaned forward to examine the data streaming across the screens. Dr. Navarro, Reyes' second-in-command, stepped forward, a hint of relief etched on her face. "We've cracked the encryption sequence for pad beta 6, she announced, her voice steady despite the tension. "It seems we were looking at this thing from the wrong angle." Archaea exchanged a skeptical glance with Eleanor. "What does that mean?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. Dr. Navarro hesitated before responding. "Think of it like searching for a pattern in a seemingly random sequence. We were trying to decipher individual symbols, but what we didn't realize was that these symbols are part of a much larger sequence, a linguistic key." A flicker of curiosity danced across Eleanor's face. "Go on," he said, his voice low and inviting. Dr. Ray stepped forward, his expression taut with concern. "The key doesn't just provide access to the data stored on pad beta 6. It opens a doorway to an entirely new realm of understanding." Archaea raised an eyebrow, her mind racing with implications. "What kind of realm?" Dr. Navarro nodded encouragingly. "One that requires us to rethink everything we thought we knew about communication and our place within the multiverse." As she spoke, the console in front of them flared bright blue, before shifting into a swirling latticework of symbols and geometric shapes. It seemed almost alive. "What's happening?" Eleanor asked, his eyes fixed on the screen with growing unease. Dr. Reyes exchanged a haunted glance with Dr. Navarro before focusing on Archaea and Eleanor. "We think we're looking at evidence of a civilization, possibly a language even more sophisticated than our own." The words hung in the air, as if suspended by an unseen force. They were poised at the edge of something extraordinary, yet Archaea couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into uncharted territory. As her gaze locked with Eleanor's, she knew they shared a single question: what secrets lay hidden beyond this doorway? As I stepped closer to Dr. Ray's console, the symbols on the screen began to resolve into a complex pattern, like a delicate vine coiling around itself. Eleanor's hand instinctively found mine, our fingers intertwining as we exchanged a look of wonder. Dr. Navarro gestured toward the swirling vortex. "We're seeing an example of metatransduction," she explained. "A form of communication that transcends linguistic barriers and redefines the fundamental structure of language itself." Eleanor's eyes widened, his gaze darting between Dr. Reyes and Dr. Navarro. "You're saying it's a map?" Dr. Reyes nodded, a hint of trepidation tainting his voice. "A representation of the underlying framework that governs all communication in this multiverse." I leaned forward, my mind racing with the implications. "And what does it say? Where is the pattern leading us?" My eyes met Eleanor's, our thoughts aligned as we asked in unison. Dr. Navarro hesitated before responding. "The coordinates. They appear to correspond to an ancient site on a remote planet, a place known only for its cryptic writings." Eleanor took a step forward, his jaw set. "And you think this message could lead us to the source of those same frequencies we detected at Pad Alpha 1? Dr. Navarro nodded, her expression serious. "Our analysis suggests that these signals are connected to an event known as the congruency event. We're beginning to theorize that our discoveries might be related and might hold the key to uncovering the truth behind this long-lost civilization." As Eleanor's grip on my hand tightened, I knew we were hurtling toward the edge of a hidden world. And with it came an unsettling realization: our lives would never be the same again.